Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to open this Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting. And Piri Harold, would you like to open the karakia for us, please?
Me ngoi tātou, he honore he kororia ki te atua, he mai ngā rungu ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tāngata katoa. Hanga ia te atua he ngā kauhau, ki roto ki tēnā o mātou. Whakataongia tō wairua tapu, hei āwhina, hei tautoko, hei apo hoki I roto I tēnei āhuatanga koe hu kraiti hoki tō mātou anake. Amen.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies? Councillor Robert was potentially joining us on Zoom. He's not there yet. So, assuming then his apology, can I have a mover? Thank you, Mayor Bernie. Seconded, Councillor Sam. All those in favour, please say aye. This gets carried. Public participation. Mr. Gain. Sorry? Mr. Keynes, my apologies. Welcome.
Afternoon, councillors. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Finance and Audit Committee is the most important committee this council's got. That's where, if we haven't got money, we can't spend it, we can't do anything in the district. 18 months ago, you set a budget of 0 rate increase. Unfortunately, today we go through and we see that somehow or other that message didn't get passed on. Because you've got a deficit that sort of was at about 6% last meeting of this committee. Now we're up to 11% above budget. I don't mind borrowing for capital works. It's something we see for it. But you and I can't afford to keep borrowing just as service or live above our means. Unfortunately, I don't see in these books any easy way out of it. It's not as simple as cutting staff and doing anything like that. We all know we've been through some floods and we've all been through COVID and all the rest. But somehow or other we can't keep running figures which are, it's a very clear financial statement in front of you. So let's turn to page 11 and look at some of those figures. We know that capital spending was budgeted for 57 million, and you can't just double your capital spending in 1 year from 27 million the year before to 57 million because we didn't have the contractors to do it. Otherwise they'll just double the prices to spend it for you. So the fact that you spent 30 million, not 57, is not what I'm here to worry about. It's more the fact that this total operating revenue of 55 million and expenditure of 69 million. How much longer are you going to keep doing this? You've upped the rates this year 7%, you need it to up to 18% if you're going to cover this sort of a deficit. So what are we going to do about it? That's what I want you as a council to talk about, rather than sitting back and just okaying the books. That's what we vote you people in for. And I don't care how much policy we set everywhere, if it's not action, it's not doing us any good. Net borrowing, let's look at some of the headwinds we've got coming. We know that interest rates have gone up. They've gone up 0.5% in the last 3 months in this financial statement. We know they'll probably go up. So we had gains over the last couple of years of about $1 million a year. The interest costs were below what you'd budgeted for. We had gains of 300 new houses helping with new ratepayers, which added another $1 million in, and we hope that will keep going. But somehow or other we have to balance the books. And I'm sitting back hoping that we're going to see some answers in the next 6 months. I look at wastewater, and it's a huge problem this winter because of the floods, but it's not the sewage that's the problem, it's the amount that we're having to treat, particularly of stormwater. So make sure that when you do your budget that it's the amount of inflow into the stormwater plant, into the sewage plants that you're fixing, not worrying about doubling the size of the sewage plant. And here I have some experience because I know that Shannon uses 300 cubic metres of water a day. Therefore the sewage should be 400 cubic metres a day. Shannon's getting 2,000 cubic metres a day. That's the level of the problem you've got right through all your wastewater plants. You then go on to, you look at your swimming pools, $300,000 above budget. And that goes right through the whole outfit, and it's not good enough. So I'm not going to say any more than that, but I just wish you to know that we as the public and the ratepayers are watching and say it's not good enough to keep spending above your means. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification? Thank you very much. Go back to our items. There are no late items I'm aware of. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? There are none. Confirmation of the minutes held 29th of June. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Member Brian. Seconded, I think it was Councillor Ross. All those in favour, please say aye. We'll take both together, both confidential. Thank you. Alright, now announcements. I'm not renowned for my announcements, but I am going to make an announcement today. I understand this is our final Finance, Audit and Risk Committee meeting for the triennium, and I just wanted to put on record that over the last period of time I've actually noticed a significant improvement in terms of the direction where the committee is heading, and I just want to thank both staff and also the elected member and independent for the work that we've actually done over the last 12 months. Who knew 3 years ago that the world would be turned upside down? And I think despite not having achieved our capital budget, and we've probably gone over in our operation expenditure, I think the trajectory is actually positive for this council. Look, not perfect, we've still got a lot of work to do, but I'm pleased to see that the trajectory is in the right direction. And everyone knows that the next training is going to be, this training was going to be hard work. I think the next training is even going to be hard work for those of you who are successful on that magical date in October, and for those of you who are not standing, I wish you all the best, and for those of you who are standing, I wish you good luck. Thank you. Right, that's my one and only announcement. So we'll now move on to item 7.1, page 9, our 12-month report. Thank you. Welcome, Abraham.
Thank you. Afternoon, councillors, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of today's report is just to outline the 12-month financial results for the year. First off, we completed a $30.6 million of the $57.7 million budget. The main reason was largely due to the charity program being moved out to future years. We did have a $6.8 million additional operation spend. Those are broken down to we had a $1.6 million of additional spend with the weather events, but we did have $549,000 additional revenue from NZTA that offset some of that. There was $1.1 million additional spend on professional services. This is largely due to the additional resourcing for planning and reporting, to support the increased volume of work done. And also the work done for the future of the landfill as well, so an extra spend on professional services for that. And lastly, the explanation of the 6.8 was we had $1.1 million of reduced labour recoveries from CapEx, and that's largely just because of the lower capital program that we had this year. The additional operating spend in Three Waters, which is around about $1 million, that's going to be loan funded, and then that debt will be taken on by the Three Water new authority there. And we've got SSPs in the report, so we've only put in the SSPs that we didn't achieve, but obviously the annual report will have all of them. There were a number of resident customer survey targets that weren't achieved, and there is going to be a presentation later this evening that's going to detail the reasoning behind those. So where to from here? Where are we at the annual report? We've got some notes in the commentary being put together. The annual report this year is being put together by our corporate planner, so it's going to be more of a story and a commentary. It's going to be a much better report this year. We still have to do the re-evaluation for roading, Three Waters, land buildings. We weren't initially going to do our own reval, but we did a fee value assessment, and the expected jump in values is more than the builder threshold, so we have to revalue those assets. And that should happen end of next month. We should put that all together. Audit are going to be here between the 14th of November to the 9th of December. The 4 weeks, it'll be on site, and hopefully to have the annual report ready to adopt on the 21st of December this year. So that is the financial report. Please, any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I think if I could ask, the deficit has been adversely affected by the reduction in capital expenditure on the basis that there hasn't been the ability to charge some of the costs of projects. So if the capital expenditure had been on target, we wouldn't be having the deficit we've got. That would be right?
Yeah, we've got about $1.1 million. We had a full program. We've got the recoveries we expected.
Just while I get my mic down. Sorry, just to clarify some of those first numbers that you read through there. There was one that was just over $1 million for, was it planning or consultants work for projects?
2.1 in total for professional services. So that covered things like additional resourcing for planning and reporting.
Planning for
resource consents, that sort of thing, the increased workload.
There was a contract for that one that came through the previous.
Yes, there was some additional revenue for that.
I'm just interested because I think you opened it up that there was $6 million or something last year that you were talking about over expenditure.
Yes.
And while that might be a number which requires some further looking at, if there are some contra charges, the $6 million shouldn't be the headline.
Right.
Other numbers, was that including the nearly $1 million for the land Morrison selection?
Yes.
So that's on there. So there's no contra to that.
No.
So that's fair to leave that in. Okay.
Just to quickly clarify, so absolutely that conversation was around the expenditure, but from a regulatory perspective, that's offset, absolutely offset by the revenue that we've received, additional revenue we have received.
But just can I clarify, just to help Councillor Bishop, so on the fees and charges, we didn't. We were budgeting 4.7, but we only achieved 4.2. But the fees and charges also included the additional for the regulatory area, but there were other fees and charges which weren't necessarily met.
Yes,
correct?
From a fees and charges perspective, we had additional revenue. I think it was in the realm of 500,000, roughly 500,000 to 600,000 in terms of additional revenue for regulatory. That was offset by needing to spend more to make sure we received that revenue. On the fees and charges side, though, so that was an increase in the fees and charges. What then brought that down was two key things were impacts of COVID on our admission, so things like the swimming pools and other facilities that we didn't have as much revenue through the door, but also in relation to the landfill fees. So now with waste going to Bonnie Glen, we had reduced revenue in terms of comparing to budget from the solid waste activity. So when you look at regulatory being up, the facilities being down, and the solid waste being down, they effectively offset each other, but there were some ups and some downs in that space.
Are you happy, Councillor Bishop? Or do you want to ask a supplementary?
I'm just trying to preempt how the public are going to receive this information in their head and say, okay, like Mr. Kane was, we went out with a headline of say 7.5% increase, and that's going to cover all the stuff that we do. It's going to cover the capital program, and next year we'll deal with the next revenue. But we know we only did half the capital program, and we've got some issues there, we know. But then this overrun of these charges, I'm imagining there's going to be a whole lot of questions from that group to say, well, actually, can you try and reconcile that, and that'll come through in the story you talk about. But then where's the reset for next year? We're already starting $30 million behind the CapEx program. It doesn't look like we've offset some of that 7.5% of pain in the rate increase. We just reset. It's hard. I completely concur with the feeling from the gathering. It's a tough pill to swallow.
That's absolutely fair. It is I completely understand where you're coming from. I think we need to be very careful about how we manage what is important this year and how we spend it and how we discuss it as a committee once the new elected members post-October are on board. We do need to be more careful. There was a bigger surprise than we'd anticipated between May and June in terms of what the final results were from what we discussed with you when we had the last FAR committee. But in terms of a headline story about why that was the case, I'll just quickly summarize it as well in terms of the key reasons are from the landfill. We had additional spending that wasn't planned, particularly around the future of the landfill, and we lost some revenue in that space as well. So that's a big contributor. We also had the flooding events. They were significant and contributed strongly to the result that we've got today. We've got $1 million in the capital space that we would have usually gone to the capital spend, that we decided that it was most appropriate to leave that in the operational space because it isn't work that was done on the capital program. Staff were focused on the operational side of the business as well. In the water space, we also spent more in our operational reactive space than we did on renewals. So when Abraham mentioned earlier, there's about $1 million there. So when, for example, the Alliance goes out and does work for us, we agree a work program in total, whether it's renewals, upgrades, or whether it's maintenance, that from a budgeting perspective for the Alliance, they don't mind where that money is spent, but from our perspective, it is very different in terms from a funding perspective. So when Abraham talked about the borrowings being used to fund that in that water space, so there's about $1 million that hits the operational line for us in the waters. But from a strategy perspective for this table, you have the decision to choose to fund that through borrowings. What that means then is when we move towards going to the Three Waters reform, if it goes ahead, then we would seek to recover that funding from the new entity as part of that operation. So while we did less renewals, we spent a lot more on reactive maintenance in that space, and that's another key reason why we got that hit in our operational.
right jump the queue. Thank you, Brian. Has the team managed to do any forecasting on what would have been the cost in the last financial year if the fanciful $57.7 million capital budget was actually delivered? Because what we've done, we've taken out $27 million and just conveniently just kicked the can along the road a bit, saying, yeah, we'll do that. But we know through the price escalations that $28 million, whatever that bucket of work, is not going to sit at $28 million. It's going to escalate. And I think, to be fair to the public, where we have told them what our work program was going to be, what it was going to cost, that sooner rather than later that needs to be included to say, okay, if this is going to be delivered, because they were very important projects to put under the ground, on top of the ground, and because of the environment that we're in, this is going to be the true cost. And I know we're talking about doing a rehash of the long-term plan on that, but it needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you're absolutely right. I think one thing that you'll see coming through, for example, in the 14th of September paper as a starter, is there'll be an ongoing tally, like you can say, or an ongoing list at any point of where projects have been. So we set a $46 million program for this financial year that we're in now. But in setting that, it was on the agreement that that from a funding perspective, we were only going to complete $35 million of that. So while there was some capacity to be flexible in terms of which projects we completed, it was based on the understanding that only $35 million would be completed. So as we worked through this program this year, Daniel and the infrastructure team have already come to you with a couple of projects where, for example, the Waitangi Surf Club, or other ones where the Foxton Pool, for example, where we work through, and as the detail work is done, we realise that the budgets are actually not sufficient to be able to complete the projects. Then we will be, on an ongoing basis, summarising and presenting to you as part of the council meetings what that means in terms of the funding and how much additional borrowings or funding gap we've used up by the fact of project and scope increases or price increases, so that at any point in time, and in terms of the long-term plan, absolutely work has already started in terms of making sure that the Three Waters program and what we need to make sure is in place to deliver and pass over a robust asset management plan to the new entity, that work has already started, so that in November, and we'll come to you with another briefing on a workshop on the 7th around the long-term plan and the timetable, is that we are acutely aware that we need to get that program underway and the resulting impacts on the capital program for the next 20 years. Because when we did our long-term plan, there's only so much room in the borrowings. We got, when we set the long-term plan, there was $9 or $10 million left by year 5 before we hit the 225% limit. So absolutely, this council can't continue to spend what it would like to and still keep within its limit. So that's absolutely at the top of mind as staff work through the asset management plan and through the long-term plan. But also ongoing, we need to keep top of mind any decisions that we've made that mean that prices need to increase for projects and the resulting impact that has on the capacity of us to do other work.
Chairman, I know it's been mentioned that we've got a deficit that we have to fund, but from a cash point of view, by the time we take out depreciation and that, the actual amount we have to fund, do we know what that's likely to be?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So if you go to, on page 18, the total operating surplus, or deficit I should say, is 6.7. So included within that, from an operational perspective, the non-cash item that that sits within there is depreciation. So we are experiencing significant, as is the rest of the country, significant increases in the cost of providing assets, and that is causing us on an annual basis to need to continually revalue those assets, when normally that's something that we would do on a biannual basis or every 3 years. But now, because prices are changing so frequently, to meet our audit requirements, we're needing to do that annually. What that means is it's having increased impacts on our depreciation line that aren't anticipated each year. So that's a key. In short, the 6.7 million less the 1.3, so 5.4 million is effectively what would need to be funded through borrowings rather than to ensure that we meet all the obligations.
I think, Chairman, it would be quite useful to make that in the report, to make that quite clear, because anyone looking at it will think, gosh, we've got to find 40-something million, and we don't, from a cash point of view. It doesn't take away the deficit, but it is made up of some things that we can't do much about. Any other questions? Councillor Victoria, and so Councillor Wayne.
Councillor Victoria, Wayne's muted. Just in regards to page 10 around representation and community leadership, where it refers to interim CE fees and iwi resourcing, there's an amount of 326, and then on page 19 it refers to an additional spend of 665. Are those two amounts being added together? Is there a reason for that, and are we able to get a breakdown of that amount?
I think off the top of my head, I can certainly provide that breakdown for you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I had was back on page 18. I'm aware this has been covered in previous meetings and a public workshop, but just on the development contributions there, the forecast was to receive $2.7 million worth of development contributions, but the actual was only 120,000. So there's obviously a shortfall of the 2.6 million. But that is due to, I think it's just important that we clarify for the public that that's due to the timing of the point at which the development contributions are actually collected. But my question is, what's the short-term impact in terms of not receiving that money, in terms of debt levels and borrowing capacity? Is there any material impact?
You're through, Mr. Chair, absolutely. So in terms of the development contributions, it's absolutely a timing impact. So that has to do with, because the policy only applied from 1 July, then there is a lag between when people apply and when they then see that resource consent through to a 224C or a separate unit. And the LTP incorrectly assumed that those would be write-offs from 1 July. So that's the key reason. So it is absolutely timing rather than an issue in terms of the number of lots, because we have seen the growth that we've anticipated in terms of that 95th percentile. In terms of your question around the borrowings, what that means is that there is, for this period of time, until we catch that up and the resource consents start coming to fruition with the new policy, is that there's a temporary increase in borrowings over that period. For this period of time, because we haven't completed the level of capital work that we had anticipated, then we are okay in that space. But it does mean a direct increase in borrowings for whatever isn't received in development contributions.
Could I just have a second question? Just in relation to page 24 of the report, under the debtors section, there's the third bullet there, which relates to a small amount of $366, which relates to the, I guess you'd term it, people who declined to pay their full rates invoices on the basis of a matter of principle around vaccine passes. And there's been some email correspondence that has circulated around that. And I just wanted to understand what the current council proposal or what options you're looking at in terms of dealing with that amount. acknowledging that it's not a small amount.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So, while it is a small amount, from I guess in terms of the guidance that we are receiving from nationally, from our advisor, from Taituara and other councils across New Zealand, because we regularly check in on this, and from opinions that have been received in the legal area, it's a tricky area to look at any form of rates remission, because from a legislative perspective, there is no issue with us with what has occurred in terms of continuing to charge rates, regardless of the fact that there were some facilities that required vaccine mandates. From an operational perspective, however, if we are proposing to bring to the council as part of a short paper on financial considerations as you wrap up the year, that if there is a will of this table to do something in the realm of, say, for example, a grant or something to allow those individuals to pay their rates, that could be an option. But from a precedent perspective, you will see in the paper that there will be very strong advice that it should not be considered in anywhere in the rating realm, because it does open up a can of worms in terms of precedent.
Chairman, page 25, and I'm pretty sure this has been explained to me and my memory is failing me, but on the trade waste there's a large amount which is very old, outstanding, $130,000. Can you just remind me what the situation is?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not an expert in this area, but my understanding is that the team are actively working with specific entities that are involved, and are of the view that we should be able to get some resolution soon in this area.
Are there any other questions? I've got one. It's relating to the revaluation, and we're saying it's because the price is going up, we're required to do a revaluation because of the accounting standards, which then flows through depreciation. But equally, if our prices are going up, surely our renewals in that years are also going up as well. So, well, it's all very well to say it's just a book entry in terms of depreciation. There will be an increased cost to council, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but in 11 years when we actually come to replace those assets. Councillor Wayne.
I'd just like to correct you there, Chair. There'll be an increased cost to the ratepayer, and that's why I think we seriously need to consider how we do our forward funding or renewals funding of depreciation, because as that recent article was circulated, we all know that where runaway depreciation, revaluation costs have been lumped on the current generation, whereas we should be considering that forward paid by debt to those generations that only use that asset.
Also, that's a discussion for the next council when they set their plan and LTE in terms of the financial strategy, because I think that's a valid point to talk about at that particular point in time. But if I just confirm that if costs are going up in terms of the cost to replace, ultimately there will be a cost to the ratepayer in terms of the cost when we need to renew those assets. Absolutely.
Sorry, just one more comment in relation to the rate status. The mayoral relief fund in terms of the tornadoes, there was a number of houses that were impacted that were either red stickered or yellow stickered. There's been the mayoral relief panel is meeting next week, and one of the things that is going to be a discussion point is we have a rates remission policy that offers some benefit for disaster events and potential rates relief as part of that. So the panel will be discussing that, and then that will also be included in a paper that will come to the 14th of September meeting as well.
Can I just ask a question on that particular point that you just discussed? So my understanding of the rates remission policy is that we would have to declare that as an actual event, a disaster event at that meeting in order to trigger that part of the remission policy, or the option is to use the mayoral relief fund to essentially just allocate some of that to meet those rating obligations. Are those some of the two different options?
Yes, that's right.
All right. Any further questions? Right, can I have then a mover for the recommendation of page 7? Thank you, Councillor David. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Christine. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Our next item is 7.2, our risk management status report. Thank you, team. Now, what I propose to do is to take these and we'll deal with the risk management bit first, the discussion, and then we'll take the procurement discussion and then the delegations discussion, and then we'll come back to the recommendation. Welcome, Ashley and Ben.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Chair and Councillors. First of all, I'd just like to start by saying that there has been great progress made within this portfolio of work around risk and the improvement program over the previous year. Before we jump onto procurement, I would just like to introduce the risk section of this report. We have brought forward over the last couple of months now a work program, a draft policy, a draft management framework and the key strategic risks. However, due to capacity constraints, we've been unable to bring the risk matrix this FAR meeting like we had originally said we would. At the moment, we are looking and going through the process of getting some additional resource within this risk space. The resource we did have unable to carry on the duty, so we're looking to re-employ in that space. Going forward, once we have this resource, we're looking to bring back all of those documents I spoke of, including the matrix, in the first quarter of the new triennium to make progress on this piece of work. In terms of the report you have in front of you, those are still the key strategic risks. They have been updated and no additional risks have been added to this for this month, but they are updated. I'll hand it back to your Chair before, if there are any questions, before Ben will introduce the procurement program.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the risk section of the report? Member Brian.
Chairman, just a comment. I'm really keen on colours, so I wondered if when you update it, you could do the updates in a nice colour. Like Toyota red would be quite good.
Certainly, we can definitely make that change for the next report.
I've got a generic question, if there's no more questions on risk. What's the process for identifying additional strategic risks? And one risk, I think, is coming home to rest for a lot of councils is significant weather events. We just need to look north and south of us, and potentially impacts of climate change, wind or weather. Just as an example, what would be the process for actually getting that on as a significant risk for council to consider?
So each meeting of ERT, they discuss the report and cover off if there are any additional risks that need to be added to this report to bring forward. Additionally, in meetings throughout the organisation, people are bringing up risks and identifying those to go through to ERT to be investigated and discussed, and whether or not those need to go onto the report. So that's the process currently. We're looking to enhance that as we go through the process, but that's the current process to get a significant risk or key risk onto this to come to council.
But if the elected members group decided there was strategic risk, then now would be the time to, if they so wished, to raise it. Is that appropriate?
Certainly, or at any other stage if it comes to mind, please just flick myself or Monique an email and we can definitely meet, discuss and look to put that on this report as well.
Providing it meets the threshold of being a strategic risk. Are there any other questions on the risk component? Therefore, we'll move on to the procurement section. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could merge the procurement and delegations together, if that seems fit.
From a discussion perspective, it might be easy if we just do all the procurement and then do the delegations, but happy that you do them. Right? But just so not jumping around the agenda too much. Sorry to make you do. We can introduce it, but when we come to questions, if we can do the questions on procurement and then delegations. Does that work for you?
Right. So the procurement improvement program section of the report in the agenda gives a brief outline of the journey we have been on so far to improve how Horowhenua District Council conduct procurement. The key point from the report would be noting that we have addressed the gaps and recommendations identified in both the 2021 CKS audit and the 2022 Horowhenua gap analysis reports, a new procurement strategy and an updated procurement policy. These are to be progressed further into our new procurement guidelines as well. In addition to the reports, an acknowledgement for greater transparency between council officers to elected members and the public have been addressed in the strategy and policy through regular procurement reporting, which will be implemented for the beginning of the new triennium. The delegations register has required a refresh for a while, and it was quickly identified that it should be completed in parallel to the procurement improvement program. This document has been updated with one significant change to note, being the Chief Executive's financial delegation. Although remaining the same amount, the ability to enter into agreements valued over the financial delegation for programs or projects approved in an LTP or annual plan was removed, with all expenditure above the delegation requiring approval from Council or an appropriate subcommittee on an as-required basis. It should also be noted that the three documents presented through the agenda have been worked through in coordination with staff, FAR committee and elected members. Since the agenda was released, after seeking further advice, a few changes have been identified and rectified so far. On page 10 of the procurement strategy, or page 85 of the agenda, references to Horowhenua have been changed to Horowhenua, and page 7 of the procurement policy and the implementation of broad outcomes changed from, that's page 95 of the agenda, in the paragraph that our suppliers, under their obligations to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and knowledge of the correct Māori protocols related to procurement, and that's been replaced with that our suppliers understand Council's obligations to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and knowledge of tikanga related to procurement. So today we bring these documents with the advised changes to the FAR committee for endorsement. And it is the strategy, the policy and the delegations register prior to the September 14th council meeting, where we'll be seeking adoption of all three of the documents.
Thank you. The questions on the procurement policy or strategy, Councillor Sam.
Thanks, Ben. Just a question. Sorry, I've gone off the page. Page 96. And I suspect this is a matter that's more for the contract management policy, but I just want to test this with you. Under the heading contractual considerations, my question is, if council had a preference for ensuring that when we procure, that we are negotiating terms along the lines of retentions or penalty payments that protect us, is that something you would expect to see in this policy, or as I say, in the contract management policy? Because it's almost like a front-end expectation or preference, but it's more around the actual contract content and performance. Are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, you're probably right in saying that should be in the contractual. But I think, as I say, in the contract management policy, it's more around the actual contract content and performance. Are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, you're probably right in saying that should be in the contractual. But I think, as I say, in the contract management policy, it's more around the actual contract content and performance. policy, and that's something that will need to be looked at as well after all this work has been done.
Are there any other questions, comments on the procurement section? I've just got one, and I've been emailed backwards and forwards, and my apologies, I got it slightly wrong because I read an old document. But on page 94 of the agenda, page 6 of the policy, we've got a procurement plan. I just want to make a suggestion here, and you can bounce back to me. I would anticipate the procurement plan that is published, there should be a requirement that it be published for a period of 3 years, and that it should only have projects that fit into categories C and D, and I wouldn't expect projects that fall into category A and B being required to go into the procurement plan. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree that plans in the C and D category should be forecasted out further. There has always been the thinking to have a procurement program which would encompass that C and D procurement plan category.
Under the procurement policy, page 3, which is 91 of the agenda, the makeup of the PRG, there is an elected member there, but would it also be mere as ex officio of committees? So that would mean 2, or is that the mayor?
Through the chair, I think the intention was that it's not really a committee of council per se. It's more it's an operational oversight group. I think that the risk is that if you have more than one elected member, when it comes to the point in time where we're bringing decisions to council, that's potentially one more elected member that's kind of declaring an interest or being more part of the process. I'm relaxed, but I suppose the question we've got to ask ourselves is what will that achieve when anything over a certain value will be coming to this table anyway.
Okay.
Subsequent, in that case, is the right timing for that member to express their interest right at the beginning of the training or during a farm meeting? When do they?
The beginning of the training, so we can bring that member on board as soon as we can.
Any other questions on procurement?
Through the chair, sorry, Mr. Chair, I just wonder, and Mrs. Hurry is right, that the appropriate time is the start of an election cycle. But I think acknowledging that some of what council has seen over the last few weeks is where we're building the plane. We're flying the plane as we're building it, and so we are trying some stuff, and you've seen that in some procurement plans and decisions that have come to this table, and certainly we want to continue to build momentum. We want to get that PRG up and running. We're not going to wait until the first council meeting of the next triennium. And so I think if there was a will of far and everyone was pretty relaxed about how that was appointed, I don't think there's anything. I think it would be helpful if there was an elected member that was keen to put up their hand and be part of that process, because we need to establish the PRG with some pace.
Can I just clarify, so what you're asking the committee now for a suggestion, or will that happen on the 14th? No.
Now, happy for now.
I'd be happy to volunteer.
I think there are no other volunteers. Sorry? What?
Thank you, Councillor Sam. Thank you for your sacrifice. Right. Okay, with no further discussion on procurement, any questions on delegations? Councillor Sam?
Sorry to be painful. Just my favourite section, which is 6.2, page 105. Thank you very much for putting the word commit expenditure in there. I guess my question is just to, and it's probably a question to you, Chair, if you don't mind, just to get your sense of whether that particular part of the delegations reasonably covers commitments, and the type of commitment I'm thinking about is, for example, an agreement or a working arrangement that's formed perhaps as a result of an environment court process, or like a resourcing type arrangement where there might be multiple, it might contemplate multiple transactions to a number of different parties, but collectively the value is over a certain, over that certain amount. Because in my view, that's the type of commitment that I'd be wanting to come to this governance table. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that the wording there captures that type of scenario.
Can I just clarify? So, use an example. You said an environment court decision as a...
Yeah, so a good example might be, say, the live-in landfill agreement, as a live, real example, where there are essentially a series of commitments that are made by council to do certain things and to provide up to a certain amount each year for various things. So the totality of that multi-year agreement and the totality of all of the potential transactions amounts over that $1 million, but individually the transactions would be sufficient to trigger that expenditure.
Yeah, okay. So can I just turn it slightly differently? We've got a roading network, right? That might actually have 10 contractors that we might spend $900,000 a year, and every year, and it's a 1-year contract. That wouldn't, in my opinion, wouldn't trigger that policy. So the same potentially would happen with the live-in landfill if you had 9 different entities of yeah, and I think the issue is it comes down to each individual contract rather than the collective work that's being done. Otherwise, you're going to be splitting hairs. But I understand where you're coming from. For example, I like your example of environment court. The environment court might actually say, well, I think to make this happen, council needs to contribute X as part of the collective agreement, X to this, X to that, and X to that, and equals 1.2 million. Should that actually, because it becomes it's all wrapped up as one decision, that probably, because the council's committing 1.2 million as part of that one decision, therefore should come back to this. That exceeds the chief executive's authority. I would anticipate in that particular case that the council would be aware of the significance of that decision and would have already delegated a specific authority to act within a range before you actually then enter a negotiation as part of a consent agreement from the Environment Court. But I agree, so my interpretation would be it's authority to commit expenditure, and it would be with one entity. So, but it's only but that is limited to the total contract of that entity rather than sort of a year by year, which was the old policy, which I didn't agree with. I see where you're also going, and this is a danger, and I don't, maybe the chief executive might want to comment, that the
in all good faith, the chief executive enters into a contract for $800,000, and then because of various other variations of additional work, that then increases over $1 million. Now, just how would you interpret that particular case?
Through the chair, well, if I take that particular example you've just used, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't have delegations to enter into a contract that had the potential of variations that took it from an $800K contract to a $1 million plus contract. So I feel like the writing of the delegations register is pretty clear, but the reality is the delegations register is only as good as the spirit and intent of the expectation between governance and management. And so I think that would be my advice to the table is, the policy itself feels really clear, but it's more about those continued conversations we have about spirit and intent.
And can I just conclude on that? It's also the third leg of the stool is probably reporting. Okay.
But I'm happy to leave it there because based on the conversations we've had with the chief executive in the past, absolutely understand the commitment in terms of no surprises and being upfront with council around this kind of stuff. So happy to leave it there. I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
If you don't mind, as the chair, if I just add one additional piece in there. Just want to bring you back to the policy, Councillor Jennings, under procurement plans. So when you speak of a program of work, for instance, we'll take the landfill. If we know that we're going into a program for the landfill that has XYZ contracts and that equates to over $1 million, but not individual contracts equate to over $1 million, that should come back to council, because we know that that program of work is going to cost at that point in time over $1 million. If that contract is 3 different contractors that equates to that, that should come back, because we're committing, knowing it's going to be over $1 million, then the CE will not have delegation. But if I bring you back to the policy under procurement plans, there's just a line in here, a paragraph that says the procurement plan is to cover the entirety of the project. A project shall not be split up into separate procurement activities, saying if you know the landfill is going to cover XYZ in stages, we should be procuring for those stages, not we're going to take stage 1 now, take stage 2 then, and stage 3, to ensure that that program of work is captured as a whole, not in separate values.
Can I just clarify? So that when we use the word project there, that could contemplate, for example, a consent, like if it's a consent application, because I think the context that I'm getting to is I'm imagining that we'll have long-term consents with consent conditions that might have a series of small amounts, but the totality is actually quite significant, and therefore the governance body should have visibility actually of the ongoing financial impact of that commitment.
Correct. So if we know that that is going to be over $1 million, then yes, we should, because we're committing by signing that contract, we're committing for over however many years that we're going to spend over $1 million, and we know at that point that we are, so that should come back, yes.
Thank you for that, Ashley. Member Brian.
Chairman, I would hate this to be my last meeting without mentioning that I think $1 million is far too low. But I do know the arguments for the other side of that, but it is. But more importantly, and I couldn't find this anywhere, and I'm in the same area as Councillor Jennings on 6.2 on page 105. It's probably there and I've missed it, but does the Chief Executive have flexibility in an emergency to actually do whatever is within reason required?
Through the chair, under the Emergency Management Act, it wouldn't actually be the Chief Executive, it would be the Controller. And so the Controller or the Recovery Manager have have those powers, and when the delegations, assuming that Council on the 14th of September will adopt the delegations manual, that then puts me in a position to be able to review the delegations that I then delegate onto staff. And so obviously, it's really important we've got a well up-to-date manual that identifies who our controllers are and that they have those delegations. But even if they weren't in a delegations register, the Emergency Management Act trumps the Local Government Act when there is a declaration.
Mr. Chair, I also believe there's a section in the procurement policy around emergency procurement. Yep.
Thank you. I've got a question on page 103, 2.3, about halfway down the page, just a bit more than that. It talks about the Chief Executive may revoke or suspend for a period or amend the terms and conditions in relation to, and the second bullet point, any delegation to the Chief Executive that Council has revoked or suspended. So that sounds to me, as a layman, that Council says one thing and the Chief Executive can revoke that if they want to. I'm just wondering whether I'm wrong or that needs to be a bit clearer.
Yeah, so that line there is a complete oversight. It's actually historical. It's been there for a while, and that's been something that has been noted and that can be removed.
Was that the deliberate mistake to see if we all read it line by line as it's been?
I think I've read it 20 million times and it's just kind of been fast by.
Alright, tongue in cheek. Right. Any further questions? There are none. So we go back to page one way back. Item 7.2. I've got to put my glasses on this. 67. We've got 4 recommendations there. Can I suggest potentially recommendation 4.2 is, are we actually recommending to Council? Or do we just want to endorse? Because I think recommending to Council sends a strong message to Council. I know you already have anyway.
It won't take the Labour Council that can either be endorse or recommend, but acknowledging that Council members sit on this committee as well, so it's not like taking the full recommendation through.
All I'm saying is that actually we're actually recommending. Sorry? But I'm happy to move it. Right? Right. So do I have Councillor Sam seconded? All those in favour please say aye. It's carried. Treasury report 7.3 page 119. Thank you very much, Ashley and Ben. Sorry? Yep.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. The purpose of this report is to update you all on the Council's Treasury position as of the 30th of June. In terms of a couple of highlights here, I don't know if I maybe not highlights, but points to mention. On page 129, you'll see that Council's cost of funds, average cost of funds, is currently sitting at 2.93, so that's increased from 2.63. It's fair to say that we are actively monitoring the interest rate situation and very conscious of the level of cover that we have between our fixed and floating rate notes. We've recently had a conversation with Bancorp advisors, and we have recently increased our level of fixed cover by about $4 million, just so that it's both in line with policy in the future, but also securing us a little bit further in terms of the level of fixed versus floating. Also, though, just mentioning that we do have to be careful. You don't want to go too far. It is a bit of a crystal ball in terms of where interest rates might go. So we have increased the level of fixed cover a little bit, but are holding off. And also another reason why we are not going any further in this area is because with Three Waters reform, while the policy in terms of how central government is going to work, the transfer of funding to councils to allow us to repay our debt is a bit of a moving feast and is yet to get some really secure guidance. So at this stage, the thinking is that central government or the entity C will provide us with a one lump sum cash payment at the start of the new entities, and that then will be up to the individual councils to decide on how they then are going to repay their debt. So, for example, for us, it might be about $60 million that we have currently in terms of Three Waters debt. So, we just want to make sure that while we're monitoring it closely, we don't go and fix everything because of where interest rates are at. Because if you do that at this stage, it's quite expensive to do that. So we are playing it carefully at this stage in terms of what we're up to, and just really paying close attention to guidance that's coming from the local government funding agency in terms of what central government are proposing to do in relation to the Three Waters debt, and we'll keep you informed as we know more. But hopefully the second part of the legislation will provide some more clarity on what's going to happen in that space. But in terms of the annual report, we have been extremely careful in terms of making sure that the internal borrowings related to the waters is clearly identified. Where we have any additional operating spending in the Three Waters space, we're making sure, and where that isn't funded by rates, that's appropriately sitting in the Three Waters debt area. So just to clarify those few points.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Just thank you, Chair. Just in term, I know we've got that cash contingency amount sitting in our debt profile, if you like. Is it still recommended that that remains at the level that it is, considering that our interest rates are now going up? And should we be doing something with it?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So we have $30 million. It's effectively a debt facility. So that some of that, we have that with two different banks. While we pay what's called a line charge to be able to have that facility, it's no different than if you have an overdraft facility on your personal bank account. So you've got the ability to draw on it if you need to, but you're not charged interest unless you draw on it, other than the line fee portion of it. So why we choose to keep that at that level is from a rating agency perspective. It's good practice in terms of access to cash or liquidity if you need it. So that's the reason why we hold on to it.
I was the mayor a minute ago. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Chairman, one of the things that's important in it is what Jacinda has said, is that we've got to be quite careful about what we capitalise. And for instance, I'm thinking on the digestives, the work that's being done there, I'm pretty sure you've got your head around that. It's probably a lot of that can be capitalised, because the more we capitalise, the better we're going to be for negotiating a payout. And sometimes I know it's a margin call. My advice is to take the margin and be sorry afterwards if we don't get it wrong.
Thank you. Yes, I think that is an area I'm conscious of, particularly with the level, as we mentioned in terms of the finance report earlier. We have done a lot more maintenance work this year than we have done renewals. And so particularly in things like the digester and other work, or other significant maintenance work that we've done, as part of, over the next sort of month, as we finalise everything for the annual report, we'll be making sure, with some conversations with the Alliance, that we've got that right, but thanks for mentioning it. From a funding perspective though, we have been careful that regardless of whether it's treated as a capital item or an operating item, if we are making sure that that money is recoverable through the new entity, regardless of which side it sits on.
Okay. Any other further questions? I just want to highlight on page 128, that little graph on page 6 of the actual report. To me, that's actually a useful diagram for you can interpret it. The saying is that we're actually currently in policy and will remain in policy. So I think it's actually both now and looking into the future. I think that's really important because it's very easy in 6 months' time to be out of policy without realising it. No further questions? Do I have a mover for the recommendation on page 119? Councillor Todd, seconded. Councillor Wade, all those in favour please say aye. It's carried. Health and safety report. Welcome, Tanya. Thank you for waiting patiently for us to deal with boring financial stuff.
Good afternoon, Chairperson and members of the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee. The purpose of the Health and Safety report to this committee is to ensure that you're able to complete part of your key responsibilities in governance of our organisation. Part of the due diligence is ensuring you receive the correct information in a timely manner and of a quality that allows you to understand and be assured that health and safety in all its aspects are being conducted within the requirements of the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015. This report in front of you is from the period of 1st of June to 31st of July, slightly shortened because of being the last fire committee this triennium. To this end, I work to ensure that these reports presented achieve that quality, and I would like to highlight the following areas in the report in front of you today. I'd like you to note that on page 132, a lead indicator, the emergency evacuation drills, the facility evacuation trials, which are occurring every 6 months under our evacuation procedure approved by FENS, have been delayed under the COVID-19 protection framework. This happened earlier in the year, but however I can confirm that since writing this report that all of our facilities have completed a trial evacuation. Also on page 134 under a lag indicator, the accident, injury and near miss reporting. As an organisation we have identified people behaviour which is reported as threatening behaviour as a critical risk. We've worked hard to ensure staff have the opportunity to learn skills, for example de-escalation techniques, to grow in confidence to report threatening behaviour and to threatening behaviour incidents, and be assured that threatening behaviour is taken very seriously by Council and support is always available for them if needed. We have seen an increase in reporting of these incidents through our People Safe system, and which have occurred across a variety of our work areas. However, we are seeing, it is disappointing to have these incidents, but we are seeing the enhanced worker engagement in reporting of these incidents, which is really positive from our organisation. I would like to point your attention to the first recommendation on page 136 from the Safe Plus March 2021 Action Plan. So this recommendation talks about building on the reporting we currently have, and over the past few months we have looked at ways to enhance reporting to Council. As such, we've created a dashboard report which we have been trialling with the ELT to refine the information with the intention to bring this level of dashboard reporting to Council. This report is nearly there, so I thought I would share this piece of work with you, which you can see on the screen now. I'll not go into too much detail on this dashboard, rather to provide an overview for now. The dashboard is based on the Safe Plus assessment reporting format of leadership, risk management and worker engagement. The front page provides an overview where we are sitting as an organisation and a comparison to other organisations who also use Safe Plus. The leadership provides a snapshot of due diligence. Risk and management provides a snapshot of critical risk management controls and associated tasks being monitored. And worker engagement provides a snapshot of how engaged workers are across the organisation. We are also working on a section around contractor management. Back to you, Chair. Please let me know if you have any questions of the Health and Safety report on the agenda.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Any questions on the dashboard? Looking good. Right. So, without going into specifics, so a green upward arrow means positive, compared with a green sideward arrow means no change. Yep.
Excuse me, Chair, no change at this point. So it will up is good, yes.
And I assume if it's going down, you'd actually have a flashing red light. Is that what you do? Any other questions?
That could be possible, but I certainly hope not. No, I have no answer to that. I could have a re-look through and come back to the committee.
I just, and Mr. Rouse may support me on this or not, but clearly in the cavity area it's a bit more dangerous because at the Cavity Council they've wanted to make sure in the threatening behaviour sort of area that it includes elected members, and I couldn't quite find whether we do that here.
That's right. Right. With thank you, Tanya and Ashley. Thank you very much, and we'll see what happens with the reporting and the new training. We've got a recommendation on page 131. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Sam. Seconded, Mayor Burney. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Next item, 7.5, page 147, Finance, Audit and Risk Resolution and Actions Monitoring Report. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. In terms of the introduction, the purpose of this report is to make sure that we're monitoring the key actions that are coming through this committee. I will note that this has grown significantly since the last committee, and that it now includes all of the Audit New Zealand recommendations that are coming through as part of the annual audit. I'm pleased to note in there that we are able to colour in quite a few of them blue, which means they're at the completed stage. We just will need to convince auditors that they stay blue by the time they finish their audit in December. But we would look again to try and complete these all off from the audit management comments point of view by the time they complete their audit in December. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Just one clarification. So what you're saying is the blue ones will stay blue until you get the big tick from Audit New Zealand. Is that what you're telling us? Or will they come off at our request?
Happy to follow whichever process you would like, really. We have noted them as completed, knowing that from an officer perspective, we've completed them. We'd look to, I guess, as part of the final audit would then need to agree with that, and then once that's the case, then we would get your sign-off to take them off the list.
Take them off.
So Mayor Burney is suggesting that we take them off now. Alright, I'm not adverse to that. I mean, particularly if we, as the committee, are happy that those ones in blue have been completed to our standard. So, for example, where my agenda is open, page 161, sensitive expenditure, I think that will be dealt with on the 14th of September by Council. So, in theory, it's coming off, it's just not off yet. That's it, right? That would be, something that's been adopted on the Council, that would be my own opinion. But I think anything that's in blue that you've actually done, credit card usage, okay. We see that's all done. I think we've just got to potentially make sure. I agree with Mayor Burney, take them off if we're confident they're done, but if they're still to be done in terms of a formal resolution, I'm sorry.
My advice would probably be, keep them on there until audit actually clear it, because then that's technically, we know that it's gone. Or we can park them in a to be formally approved area.
Thank you. I like the car park. Right. No further questions. So do I have a mover for the recommendation on page 147? Mayor moved. Councillor Jones seconded. Councillor Ross. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Our last item, 7.6, page 177.
So the purpose of this report is to outline the future fire agenda. I need to apologize in terms of, at the stage of writing this, personally I had thought that we were going to have a meeting in September, so it's clearly a work program that's outlined until September, but we are looking to wrap up today, so that's why you see it rolling out to September. But I'll pass it to Mr. Jones, who may talk through the process in terms of wrapping up this committee.
Yeah, that was a delegation upwards. Everyone's seen that. I mean, and it was still part of the formal meeting, but I'm really keen. There are a few things that I would actually like to see as the chair that we actually wrap up. That doesn't need necessarily a full committee meeting. I know there is a scheduled council meeting now scheduled for the 28th of September, and I'm proposing that we actually have a briefing/workshop for an hour prior to that meeting to wrap some of those issues up. One of those issues that I'll talk to elected members after the meeting is about undertaking a full self-assessment of how the committee has performed over the last 3 years and making recommendations in terms of potential improvements, different ways of doing things, options for the new council. But we'll talk about that after the meeting, so potentially we can just deal with those by way of workshop briefing. It's probably not necessary. Any no likely recommendations out of those items, this is more information. So therefore I'm comfortable that we actually move the work program report on page 177. Second, Member Jackson. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. That concludes our last item of formal business of this committee for the training.
Chair Brian, Chair Phil, sorry, independent member Brian, I just wanted to acknowledge the work that you have done over this triennium and for you, Phil, the last two. I know we've had some challenges in lots of space in that time, but I just do appreciate the contribution that you've made to the Horowhenua, and really appreciate the commitment that you've had to this committee, and also the manner in which you've delivered that. Contribution has been much appreciated as well from all of us, and the personal relationships that we have with you both, I think have been a real positive outcome from that. I think you've both set us on the right sort of platform and trajectory, and hopefully the next council will be able to continue that good work. But just want to thank you very much for your contribution.
Your Worship, all I'd like to say is I don't think I've worked with a nicer bunch of people, both in councillors and staff, and everyone's heart is in the right place, and they're all, I think everyone's here to do the very best for the area, and it's just been an absolute pleasure for me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and thank you very much. You've treated me so well, with respect, which is more than I get in other places, like home. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Mayor Bernie and team. I wouldn't have accepted the reappointment last time if I didn't think I added some value. I think you just said that I do, but also I have enjoyed it. We always haven't agreed, but that's not what democracy is all about. It's actually everyone having a say and coming to a conclusion and moving forward together for the betterment of the Horowhenua district. And I just want to thank you all for your participation. Do we have a closing karakia, or is it just passing it? Karakia, would you do the closing karakia, please?
Kia tau kia tātou katoa te atu whai o te tātou ariki e Ukraiti, me te aroha o te atua me te whiwhinatahi tanga ki te wairua tapu, a ke